So let's look at these live school forms and reporting in the reporting system. Okay, I'm going to go over each one of them briefly, and then we are going to go into the actual forms themselves and go through them. Okay, so the first form that you need to know about is the host application form. The host application form is filled out by a missions-minded pastor, and it's usually done at a pastor awareness meeting where we find out who are the missions-minded pastors in the area, and we visit with them and tell them about Live School and see which ones we feel we should work with and they feel that they want to use Live School. Those pastors will fill out a host pastor application form typically at that meeting, and then decide at that time, the approximate time, that they will take the facilitators they want us to train and bring them to a facilitator training, which you are now in. Okay? That form is filled out only one time, okay? But it's brought back to this meeting, the facilitator training, and it's gone over, and any adjustments that have happened between the time of the pastor meeting and the facilitator training are marked on the form, and when you sign the agreement at the end, everything is then sealed. Okay, so that's the host application form. The second form is a facilitator registration form. At the pastor meeting, we will typically give a blank facilitator registration form to the pastors. The idea is for the pastor to fill out a pastor recommendation that Bob Coleman is going to be, I want him to be the facilitator for my school. And so the host pastor fills out a recommendation with all your information on it, gives it to you, and sends you to this facilitator training. You are to take that facilitator registration form and actually submit it at the beginning of this facilitator training. If you have not turned it in, you need to do so. If you don't have one, then ask your Live School trainer, facilitator trainer for one at the end of this session, and make sure you get it filled out. Make sure you get your pastor to fill it out, give the recommendation, and turn it in. We want to make sure that each one of you is under authority. It's a principle of the kingdom. If you want to walk in authority, you need to be under authority. Okay? So that's the facilitator registration form. Now, we want to walk with you. We would like you to come to facilitator trainings that are in your area for the next 2 years. Each time you come, we're going to ask for your pastor to fill out one of these forms. It lets us know who's at the training and who is not. Okay, we'll go over this form in more detail when we go through this in just a little bit. The third form that we're going to discuss is actually the agreement. It also is filled out at the facilitator training. Actually, at the end of this meeting, at the end of this training, normally we will execute the agreement. It's a legal contract between you and World Mission Center, which is the umbrella ministry that oversees Live School. It is filled out only one time. It's a legal agreement, and we will go through it later. The fourth one that we want to talk about is the school calendar, the schedule that you plan for every intake. You do it one schedule for every intake you do. You may have already covered that in this facilitator training. If not, you will do so before the end. Okay? During the facilitator training, you will work on it. Then when you finalize recruiting your students and you understand what their schedule is, especially if they're part-time, you will then write out a detailed schedule of your school, of when you're going to meet. Okay? The next item for reporting is the student application. We've already discussed it, and it's done after the facilitator training. You use it to recruit your students. You will need to create one. This is all repeat here. But also there is a sample one on the data disk or the flash drive in the Live School unit you will receive that you can build your own from. The next form is the intake registration and delivery form. All those forms up to that point really have nothing to do with actually running your school. Now then, we're going to talk about the intake registration and delivery form. which is what you use to register your students. This is one of the forms, one of the two, that you absolutely must turn in to your live school coordinator, the Gateway coordinator, for every intake of students. The next form is the intake registration and delivery form. Okay? That's what you use after you recruit your students and they filled out the application and you interviewed the students, you've prayed over the applications, and then you've decided which students you want, you accept those students, and they must register for the school. You do that on the intake registration and delivery form. Okay? You register all the students for an intake. On that first intake, it must be submitted before you receive your live school unit. On subsequent intakes, it must be turned in to your live school coordinator within 1 week of your school starting. You can only add students, that means, for 1 week after your school starts. The next form we're going to discuss is the attendance and homework tracking form. It is simply a form that you use that you can track 12 students a month at a time. So you'll have to make copies of it out of your manual, and then you will use that to track how many sessions each student did, which ones they missed, which ones they turned in, which ones they made up, which ones they did on time. Okay? Next, you have the quarterly intake updates. Quarterly is every 3 months. Every 3 months, the live school coordinator needs to hear from you. We want an update. On that update, what we want to know is, how are you doing? How is your school doing? How are your students doing? What is going good? What is not going good? And how could we make it go better? Okay? There are actually 9 different points that we will go over to help ensure that your school is healthy. Finally, we come to the certificate request and evaluation form. 2 months before the end or the graduation of your school, you must submit this certificate request and evaluation form into your Live School Gateway coordinator. If you don't do it within 2 months or before 2 months' time, we cannot guarantee that we will be able to get any Live School certificates to you. It has to go to your Gateway coordinator, which then goes to your regional director, which then goes either to South Africa or to America typically, which then they get printed out after they're verified and checked, possibly with communication back with you. And then we have to get the forms back to you. We need at least 2 months to get that done. You need to list the names of the students on that form exactly as they want them to appear on the Live School certificate. That is what we will use to print their names on the Live School certificate. So make sure you write in block capital letters very neatly. Every student that began the intake needs to be on that certificate request form somewhere. There is a section on the form that actually there's actually a place on the form for students who did not complete the school, who quit. If they quit, you need to list them on the form. If they are on the registration intake form, they need to be on the certificate request form. If they actually completed the school, but they did not meet the requirements for a Live School certificate, you fill them in the same spot on the second page as if they, at same place that those who did qualify meet the requirements. Okay? Basically, the evaluation that you do will tell us who meets the requirements and who does not. You're going to record on that the number of sessions that each student missed. You're going to record on that the number of homework assignments that each student did not turn in. If you do not use that template that we provide you to keep track of their attendance and their homework assignments, you will not be able to turn in that form with proper information. They must meet the requirements for them to get a Live School certificate. It will also ask on that certificate whether or not they paid their 10 US dollar equivalent for the Live School certificate for those who actually meet the criteria. Okay, so the final thing I want to discuss in this section is that you refer in your manual to the Live School certificate policy, which we covered in an earlier session or at an earlier time. Okay? You will simply want to refer to it and make sure your students understand it, so you will have to explain it to them, communicate it clearly. Now we were going to go and look at some of these forms in a little bit more detail. We will go back through a couple of these forms. If you would please now turn to the Live School Host Application Form. On the Live School Host Application Form, you are going to basically the pastor will have filled this out at a pastor meeting before the facilitator training. If that has not taken place, you need to fill one out here. It has certain things that I want to discuss. It has some of the same questions that are asked on the intake registration form. Do you have electricity? Do you have a television? And so forth. It also asks if you want to use your school, or if you're planning on using your school in association with other churches. Let me just talk to you about several good reasons you should consider using Live School in association with other churches. Number one, Jesus prayed in John 17, verses 20 through 23, that we would work and operate as one. The Great Commission will not be fulfilled unless we work together. So when you work in association with other churches to run a Live School, you are actually fulfilling the Lord's Prayer that He prayed in John 17, that we would work together as one. Number two, some churches, specifically where we actually like to run Live School, grassroots, back streets churches who don't have access to proper training, those churches who are nearest the unreached typically will have less membership than those in the big cities. And so as a result, you may not be able to run 2 consecutive intakes at once, one after another consecutively. You might be able to have 5 students in your first intake, but then you won't have anybody unless the Lord causes exponential growth in your church. You won't have anybody to train then when it's time to start the next one. So that Live School is going to sit idle. But if 2 or 3 or 4 of the churches that are in your proximity work together, you would be able to run one strong Live School. Okay? So it makes sense for you to consider running Live School in association with one another. It's good stewardship. Okay? Now, it's good stewardship. It also provides synergy. It provides financial synergy. You may not be able to afford a Live School, but 2 or 3 or 4 of you together could put together and gather up enough funds to operate the school successfully and to actually contribute something of value to the school. Okay? Another thing that I want you to consider is that when you work in association with other churches who would not be able to normally host a Live School, you are actually mobilizing more churches. You are mobilizing the body of Christ to the unreached. Okay? So I want you to consider these things, please, when you are considering whether or not to run your Live School in association with other churches. There's a spot on your form to do so. You can fill in the names of where to do so. Another point I want to point out on the host application form, it asks you on the second page the type of Live School you're going to run. Are you going to run a resident full-time school? Are you going to run a non-resident full-time school? Or are you going to run a part-time school? A resident full-time school is a school where all the students live together on a campus, and then they go to school together. A non-resident full-time school is where they actually live at home in the town near where the school's going to meet, and they come together every day, 5 days a week to go to school. And then you have a part-time school. If you have a part-time school, you must be completed with that school in no more than 18 months' time, including the outreach phase. I highly encourage you to do everything you can to get it done as soon as possible, hopefully within a year's time. Okay? Then it's going to ask you, what type of students are you going to train? Are you going to be training church leaders? Are you going to be training members of the church for missions? Or are you going to be training both? We want to track each intake. What is the purpose of that, of the students? Why are you doing live school? Then you're asked on this to do some projections. How many students do you want to be trained in that first intake? That way, the pastor knows how many facilitators he needs to be trained at this facilitator training. A ratio of 1 facilitator needs to be trained for every 8 students. Okay? The last part that I want to talk about this form, which is the actually very important, is the contribution that your host church is going to contribute toward the use of Live School. At the time that this form was made, the cost of a Live School unit is $1,300 US dollars, or the equivalent of $1,300 US dollars. Not everybody can afford to pay that amount. If they cannot pay that amount, they mark that they would like a sponsor to help them. But nobody gets the school for free. Everybody contributes something. So if you need a sponsor to help you pay for the $1,300 US dollar equivalent for the Live School unit, there's a place for you to mark it on the form. It says, do you need a host? Do you need help finding a sponsor? It's a yes or no question. And then there's a location where it asks you, what is the total amount in US dollar equivalents that you will be able to contribute, meaning the host church? Okay? Very important that you put something in there. Not the least amount that you can get away with. Okay? What you can actually afford. You need to spend some time in prayer and ask the Lord. We will have to come into agreement with that amount with you. Obviously, there is a large cost to using this school. But we understand that in some areas, they cannot afford the cost of the school, and so we do what we can to help them find sponsors. Okay? We also ask you, in what currency will payment be made? Okay? And then you have an opportunity to decide how you want to pay. What payment plan do you want to use? You're either going to pay it one-time lump sum, or in whatever method you choose in the first year from the time of the signing of this agreement. So you sign this agreement. At the end of the facilitator training, we would like to see a down payment. You should have come to this facilitator training with a down payment from the host church. Okay? If not, by all means, before you get the Live School unit, there will need to be a down payment made. But there's a place for here for you to write how you're going to make the rest of the payments if you're not going to do it all at one time. And that's the end of this form. When we sign the agreement, we will go over the financial portion of that form and make sure that you and us are both in agreement and sign off on it at the same time we sign the agreement. At that point, you are responsible to see that you keep the schedule that we both agreed to. Okay, so that has to do with the host application form. The facilitator registration form is the next one, and I already talked about it. It's very self-explanatory. If you have any questions, ask your facilitator trainer. The next form, and this is the agreement that I keep referring to, we must go through and discuss certain parts of it. I want you to understand the legal agreement that we're making between the host church and World Mission Center. We want on the first page the host church name and the school name. You need to understand something concerning the school name. You may not call your school Live School. In the agreement, it states as such. Live School is a trademark name, It's not allowed to be used as part of the name. You can call it whatever you want. It just can't have Live School in it. In actual fact, it becomes essentially your school that you are running to equip your people to plant your churches among the unreached. You're not planting Live School churches, though we want to understand and be able to measure how effective this school is being in accomplishing its objectives, which is to see the Great Commission fulfilled. They are under your authority, under your jurisdiction. That's why we work through the church. We believe God has called the church to fulfill the Great Commission. Okay, so let's just look very quickly at the agreement. Okay, you are being appointed to run Live School in your venue, where you are. Okay, the duration of this agreement is for 5 years' time. From the date of the signing of this agreement for 5 years. There's 3 blanks there. I like to say you put today's date, then you put a date in the second blank 5 years later, and then there's a third blank. It says or. And I tell my guys you can put or until Jesus comes. Basically, you're making a 5-year agreement here. Okay? You need to know that there is a stipulation in this, this agreement that says if you do not use it, you lose it. In other words, we want to see these schools being used. It's a stewardship issue. These schools are too expensive. I've just discussed the price with you. The school is too expensive to have sitting on some pastor's desk or on the bookcase collecting dust. Okay? So basically, as a stewardship issue, if you are not using your Live School, but Brother Joe over here, he's got students ready to go, and I don't have any other Live School units in the area, I'm going to come and say, let me use your Live School, and I'm going to give it to Brother Joe so he can start his intake. And when you get your act together and you get your students recruited and you're actually ready to start, then we'll get you one. So that way he's able to start. We're able to bring another Live School unit from somewhere else and replace it if you haven't been using your school for a year, you get your stuff together. Okay? So that's why that obligation is there. That's why that's in the contract. You need to understand also that you need to put in the location where it says paragraph 6 where the school is going to be held at. Your facilitator developer will help you with that. Okay? It says that you are going to provide a graduation ceremony for the students. We don't do that. You do that. In paragraph 8, it says that we will be able to visit. We actually want to come and visit. We want to come and encourage you, make sure the school's being run properly. We want to come and actually walk with you and see how things are going and rejoice with you as the Lord is mobilizing your people to reach the unreached. Okay? It's saying here in paragraph 9 that you're going to fill out the reports that we have discussed and that we're going through. Okay? And it also gives, it says the school. What is the school address? This is paragraph 12. In other words, the host church address where we are going to have legal contact with you needs to go in that blank. Okay? Then, basically, you're going to go down to paragraph 14, and it's going to state that Live School reserves the right to open other schools in blank. You're going to put in the country that you're going to operate your school in. So you would put, if you're in the U.S., you would put the U.S. If you live in Nigeria, you put Nigeria. If you're in South Africa, South Africa. India, India. Okay? This is basically telling you that we are going to actually try to find other people, other churches who are missions-minded to use Live School in order to fulfill the Great Commission to multiply laborers to the mission fields. And then finally, there's a place for you and for us to sign with witnesses to execute this agreement. The first portion of it is for the Live School organization to fill out. The second portion is for you to fill out. You put the date and the place. So that's the agreement. We've already talked at length about the intake, registration, and delivery note. Your facilitator developer will talk to you more about it in just a few minutes. Okay? There is a place on the second page where you can fill out 1, 2, 3, 4 different students can fit on the page. So don't write on it, make copies of it for the number of students that you're going to need. Each student needs to sign it, okay? If you, as the facilitator, are also a student in the first intake, which you are normally, you actually also need to fill that information out, specifically the certificate request when we get it. You must fill one of those out. Just because you are a facilitator does not mean you're going to get a Live School certificate. You must meet the same requirements as the student. Okay? You need to make sure you understand that. Concerning the quarterly reports and testimonies, I told you there were 9 things that we're looking for the health of your school. We want to know, number 1, that the school's operating. Does it have a heartbeat? Okay? Number 2, where are you? What course and what session are you on? Every quarter we want to know, so we want to see you're making progress. Number 3, what's the dropout rate? How many people have dropped out or quit? Who and why? Number 4, how's the equipment operating? If you're having a problem, we want to know about it. Number 5, outreaches. Have you done any short-term outreaches during the curriculum phase? Let me just suggest that you do those after the character development portion of the school, okay? Or where are you planning to go? There's a whole series of questions you can look at in your manual that will discuss these questions. Number 6, testimonies. Tell us some of the testimonies that we can rejoice with you, and that those who are sponsoring these schools for you, we're trying to hook up sponsors with you to run these schools. Let them know what's going on so they can rejoice and understand and be motivated to be involved more and more, even possibly coming and helping in greater ways. Okay? Student-to-student relationships, how are they going on? We want to know about that. Are you having friction? Are you having problems? Do you need help? Okay? What about facilitator-student relationships? What's your relationship with the students? Are you angry at them? Are you frustrated? We can help you with that. We've been there, we've done that. Okay? Finally, facilitator space. How are you doing spiritually? Are you keeping that margin in your life? Okay? Are you spending time? How are you doing emotionally? How are you doing physically? Okay? And do you have any questions or insights to share? All right? So that has to do with your quarterly reports, the 9 different things that we want to hear from you quarterly concerning your school. Your Live School coordinator, the gateway coordinator for your region, will decide with you what method of reporting for those quarterly reports will work best, whether it's by a phone call and he takes notes, by a personal visit, or you actually submit a written report that he has you send in. Okay? The last form I would like to go over, praise the Lord, is the certificate request and evaluation form. Now, as I told you, once you get out of here, you're going to have 2 main forms that you turn in per intake. The registration form for the intake, and then the certificate request form at the end. In the middle, you will fill out the quarterly report or communicate with your gateway coordinator to give a quarterly report. That's the basic system, and why I say the reporting requirements are minimal but necessary. Now, this certificate request form, as I said earlier, must be filled out and turned in 2 months in advance of the graduation date for us to get it back to you in time. You will note on the first page that there is an area for people who did not complete the Live School. We want to know everybody who started the school, who's on that registration intake form, should be on this certificate request form. Everybody, okay? Those who did not complete the school should be where in the section that says students who did not complete the Live School. Fill out who they are and the reason they quit or had to leave, okay? Directly under that, you have students who completed Live School. There's 1 on the first page and there's 4 places on the second page. Make as many copies of the second page as you need to cover the number of students that you have in your intake. You will need to sign off on each one of these pages so that we have your word that this is accurate and true to the best of your ability. Let me just refer you to the attendance and homework tracking template that is in your manual to help you get this right. Okay? I do want to say two other things. The first one is, as I had mentioned a couple minutes ago, if you, the facilitator, are also a student, for instance, in the first intake, which many of you will be. First time I facilitated a school, I was also a student. It can be done. Well, how can it be done? How am I going to know how to lead? I haven't even been through the school. You have one-page summary notes of each session that you read ahead of time to keep you a half a step ahead. The other responsibility are administrative in nature. You've been chosen by your host pastor because he believes in you. He sees the gift of God in you. He wants to mentor and help you grow and blossom for the benefit of Jesus and his kingdom. Okay? So, I want you to understand that. And then finally, I want you to turn to the last page of this certificate request and evaluation form. The last page is the evaluation. It needs to be filled in when you fill in for the students. We want to know how the intake went. We want to track what the impact of Live School has had on your church planting, on reaching unreached people groups. Very important that you fill this in. Okay? We want to hear some testimonies, some of the key testimonies over the time of this particular intake. Okay? We want you to also give us some ideas of what the greatest need is and what kind of strategy you think will best fulfill the Great Commission to the unreached in your area. Finally, we want to know if you know of any other churches or would be willing to host a pastor awareness meeting that we could pull other pastors in who would be interested, who are missions minded and would like to use Live School. That is the certificate intake and evaluation form, and that concludes this session. God bless you.